Hey everybody! Oh my gosh, I can't believe it! We are at the end of our lecturing. This is the last part of the last lecture for the course, Conservation Ecology. It ends with a boom. That means that we've been talking about problems, or at least for conservation ecology, we talked about why we have this loss of biodiversity, and for this lecture, we are going to talk about solutions to counter the loss of biodiversity. So we end on a hopeful note here for the course. So we have several categories as far as solutions are concerned, and those categories, we'll go ahead and begin. The format change, I don't know, sorry about that. If you do want to see this in its glory, you can go to the static version since the format somehow changed on me, but nonetheless. So where we have problems that are in categories, like for instance, habitat loss being a major cause for the loss of biodiversity, we have solutions that then trend towards these categories. So in order to counter the loss of habitat, we have different strategies that we can use. Now, there are land conservation and land preservation organizations, and some of those are local, like a county preservation organization. For instance, like the Northampton County Land Preservation for Farms. I know that the head of our department, Charlie Reinheimer, has his, I can't remember how big his farm is. 50, 60 acre farm is in preservation where it cannot be developed. That land cannot be developed. And that's part of the effort in conservation. You have, that's a county run one. You have some nonprofit organizations, like for instance, the Wildlands Conservancy based in Emmaus. And their main initiative is the preservation of land. They buy, oops, sorry about that. They buy up tracts of land and keep it from being preserved. You also have these national efforts and international efforts where they focus on preserving land and conserving land, and that is saving habitat in order for that habitat to remain, or target that habitat to restore it so it can support all of the plants and the animals that used to live there or that now live there, to not lose more of them. The biodiversity hotspot concept was born out of the idea that, of course, wouldn't it be the perfect world if human population growth rate could remain stable and we just stopped developing land. However, we know that unfortunately that's unrealistic. And so what the biodiversity hotspot concept does is it targets those specific areas that have high degree of biodiversity and many endemic species. That's what you see here in red, these biodiversity hotspots. And so you have a targeted conservation effort by the international community to make sure that these specific areas do not become developed. So you get more bang for your buck. You save many species when we target these specific areas for conservation. Now, restoration ecology, this is where this particular effort is where you have land that has been developed, or an area that's been developed, and you take it back to what it once was for the goal of preserving or conserving the species there, bringing species back. This is a huge field in the field of conservation ecology. I should say a huge initiative, and is ever growing. This can be passive, such as taking farmland and just letting it go back to its original state, or taking a stream bank and just allowing it to grow. Or you can have these targeted efforts, like if you have a stream bank that had been developed for decades, that you would actually go in and replant that area. So it takes a shorter period of time. It involves a little bit more economic effort, but it is a faster way to get to your end goal. dams. That's a big initiative right now, is removing dams along native waterways, in that you once had dams built for some reasons or another. Sometimes if there you had some sort of an industry or a small, like a mill that was next to a stream, you would slow the water down purposefully and then speed it up. Those dams being removed restores streams back to their natural way of flow and brings back the animals that once lived there. It's extremely expensive to do this, but this is being done all over the Lehigh Valley. Now, I don't think that video that's there, I highly recommend that you watch it. It's very cool. It's as far as restoring the corridors for salmon using what are called salmon cannons, and that is these whoosh systems that take fish through a vacuum system up and over dams. It's actually kind of interesting to see. What you see in the lower portion is people working together to restore a wetland area that is a mangrove forest. We talked a bit about in ecosystem ecology as far as how important mangroves are in protecting wildlife, maintaining or restoring biodiversity with all the fish that live there. But also, it has been shown that mangroves help keep inland flooding in check. They act as a natural barrier between the ocean and inland. And so they're finding more and more that the mangroves that were once destroyed, it benefits humans by not having flooding occur, by replanting these mangrove trees. And the benefit then happens to be maybe biodiversity wasn't their first reason for restoring those mangroves and planting those mangrove trees. It was to keep flooding down, but biodiversity benefits nonetheless. Now, as far as protecting populations, there are several laws, local, state, national, international laws that help populations that are in peril. And as mentioned in the previous PowerPoint, that when you have animals that are designated as state or federally endangered or threatened, they are afforded protections by the state or by the federal government as far as setting up action plans, subjecting those populations to study, as far as keeping them from going extinct. Now, you have other ways of restoring populations besides just these legal protections. Some of these are more effective than others. Some of these are more high profile than others. Some of these are more expensive. And none of these, I should say, this is what I usually start off this section with, but I forgot, so I'm going to say it now, is that none of these are single solutions. Where some may be more effective than others, countering the loss of biodiversity is really an integrated approach where many of these strategies must be put into play in order to be successful. So I'm talking about them one at a time, but all of these have to work together in order for us to save or stop the loss, or at least slow down the loss of biodiversity. So species reintroduction, captive breeding programs, and then reintroducing species into their historic habitat. This is a really high profile effort and gets a lot of attention. Unfortunately, it's very expensive and time consuming and is often unsuccessful. Only 1 in 10, they say, actually work. And now, you did watch the film for a learning activity about reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone and how successful that's been and how that's had this enormous effect on the biodiversity of Yellowstone National Park. So that's a success story. There's also the reintroduction of the California condor. If you want to look up on that, dating back into the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, which was really save that species from extinction. Again, a small part of what conservation is intended to be. You have a bit of a doomsday scenario here with cloning and tissue saving as well as seed banks. And that is with seed banks, is you have some of these facilities around the world. Generally, they're in very cold places underground where there are seeds from almost all of the plants, not just agricultural plants, but wild plants that we have on our planet, that are put into kind of dry dock, that they're suspended. Well, seeds by nature are in suspended animation, but that they are housed. So for some reason, if we do lose a species of plant, that we have the seeds and we can regrow any plant that becomes extinct. Cloning and tissue saving are along the same lines. We have successfully cloned animals, as you may know, like Dolly the sheep. That wasn't really that long ago. And so what we have done is we have saved the DNA, the tissue of animals that inevitably may become extinct, that are critically endangered, as well as, cloning techniques. That is a process of cloning with an egg and sperm, bringing back the woolly mammoth, for instance, bringing back something that's extinct, or cloning something that's almost extinct or critically endangered, or saving the tissue. So if that animal does become extinct, we have the DNA where we can clone it. Now, again, shouldn't we? It is said that, hey, why aren't we just preserving habitat instead of going to the trouble of like saving tissue and DNA for, it doesn't give us a false sense of security. Why bother saving habitat when, gosh, we can just clone everything? And it's just kind of like, no, that can't be the answer. The answer, I should say, but it's one of these scenarios, why don't we just save the tissue? Because you just never know. And scientists will study, actually. Part of their toolkit is understanding what the minimum viable population is, as far as how many individuals are needed in this population to continue it. That concept's a little bit out of place now that I'm looking at it. The minimal viable population should have been on another slide. It's here, so I'll just mention it. Seems like a bit of a non sequitur slightly, but this is where scientists or conservation managers for management plans must calculate how many individuals of any given population must exist in order for that particular population to recover itself, to thrive. Because what good is it if you have, 3 rhinos of a certain type of rhino left in the wild? The minimum viable population, you might need 40 or 50 in order for the population to recover. And of course, your species ecologist is going to play a great deal into revealing what the minimum viable population is. Now, mention that a really big issue in loss of biodiversity that maybe doesn't surge to the forefront in most people's minds is the problem of invasive species. And there's my spotted lanternfly there. So what can we do about invasive species? Well, as much as we have conservation management plans to keep a species from going extinct, we also have conservation management plans that help combat the problem of an invasive species. What do we do about the spotted lanternfly? What do we do about the Burmese python? So there are different types of strategies in order to help get rid of invasive species. And you've probably seen it, the spotted lanternfly. The advice that you hear left, right, and center is if you see a spotted lanternfly, step on it, kill it. Whether it's the eggs on a tree or the nymphs or the full-grown adults, you do your part you know, you don't have to be an ecologist. That's how you help with the effort of eliminating or cutting down the number of spotted lanternflies. Also removing another initiative. Oh, my computer's gone wonky again. Please don't. Another initiative is um, if it's a plant, if it's an animal, killing them. Like there you see the not just spotted lanternflies, but here's a live toad disposal point with the cane toads all across Australia. They have cane toad killing parties, or they have roasting parties where they have cookouts with cane toads. But that is a place where you can actually dispose of the ones that you catch, and you get a bounty for them. I know with Burmese pythons, you would get a bounty for them. Plants are a little easier because you can pull them out. Oh, come on, computer, please don't. You can pull them out. So they have like weeding parties, invasive species cookbooks, learning how to eat your invasive species. You have physical removal. You can have laws that keep, like for instance, you can't have Burmese pythons as pets in Florida because so many people have released them. You're not allowed to bring in plants from other countries to avoid them getting released into that area. For the zebra mussels and invasive species, they have laws as far as moving your water gear, your canoes and kayaks from one lake to another. That's a state law here in Pennsylvania. You can remove them with herbicides, pesticides, or like I said, physical removal. Lots of different strategies when it comes to invasive species. Combating poaching and illegal trade, this is really tricky because you're dealing with international law and you're dealing with a lot of underground types of mafia setups with a lot of money taking place, trading, a lot of money trading hands, I should say. You know, whether you have armed park rangers, people that are armed with guns, as you can see if you watch that video. This is very dangerous work as far as keeping poachers at bay. You have a lot of people, rangers that are killed in this way. International law, you absolutely have many international laws as far as the illegal or making the trade of wildlife and wildlife parts illegal. CITES is that international agreement and is legally binding. So you can actually be tried and prosecuted under international law by poaching. However, only for countries who agree to this. You have some that don't participate, and unfortunately it hasn't stopped enough of this poaching taking place. Now, what the aim to do, but is very difficult, is to, you know, it's about supply and demand. So you do something about the demand, and then the suppliers won't be supplying that. Like for instance, that is Yao Ming in that center picture. He's a basketball player from China who played basketball in the United States for a while, but he's considered, he's huge in China. He's a big hero, and he got on board and about the anti-ivory initiative in China because there isn't elephant poaching in China. It's in Africa, but where the demand for all of this ivory is in China and other parts of Asia. And what his part is, as far as education, is to try to change the minds of Chinese people as far as not wanting ivory. And when there's no demand for it, then the poaching won't take place. You also see this like with illegal drugs, as far as, you know, the reason there's so much of a problem with illegal drug trade is because there's so much of a demand for illegal drugs. And they say one of the arguments, whether I do agree with it or not agree with it, is to make certain drugs legal, and then you'll cut off the demand as far as the illegal part of that. Addressing pollution. Now, pollution is one of the problems of why we lose biodiversity. And so we put laws into place that keep pollutants out of the environment so as not to harm wildlife, and in turn not to keep decreasing our biodiversity. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and our environmental laws, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all in the early 1970s, passed unanimously. There were no votes when passing most of these laws in the early 1970s. I believe it was 1970. As far as like the Clean Air Act, for instance, because we all decided as a country that, you know, this is really important. I mean, before 1970s, before we had any laws about clean water and clean air, the place was a mess. So, you know, they recognize this is for human existence, but it has in turn helped with all the other plants and the animals we share our country with, where everyone was on board that it's a human right to have clean air and clean water. Now, unfortunately, and I'm not going to get too much into that at this point, times went on and it has become a partisan issue as far as laws that help keep the environment clean. Another discussion for another time, but just to kind of move through this. And as you see, like, because of those laws, I should say, or most of them, considering 1970 was a starting point, have been wildly successful. The Clean Air Act, I mean, you brought down carbon monoxide, nitrous oxides, volatile organic compounds, sulfur oxides, particulate matters, and lead, you know, up to 99%. That's an older graph, 2012. This is in our air because of the Clean Air Act from 1970 until 2012. Considering our population has increased and our energy consumption, that's a lower graph, and vehicles traveled, and our GDP have increased significantly. Now our emissions have gone down, that we've been able to reduce all of these pollutants despite an increase of population and vehicles and energy consumption. So that's a huge success. It doesn't mean that we can now weaken all of these, which we have because of business interests and big corporations and lobbyists and all of that. But nonetheless, back to our topic, that addressing pollution is absolutely has been done and continues to be done as far as helping with biodiversity. Research and education, absolutely. Whether these are international organizations, Convention on Biological Diversity, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the World Conservation Strategy, the arm of the United Nations Environmental Program, the World Wildlife Fund. You know, some of these are governmental, some of these are nonprofit, but the international science community working together that recognize that this is critical, that preserving biodiversity is critical for life on our planet, and for the well-being of all people, working together on solving these problems, making recommendations, protecting biodiversity, protecting ecosystems, and protecting populations, recognizing that this is of critical importance. But these are not, like, they can't form laws like CITES, and they can't enforce laws, they just make recommendations. And how many times or how much the scientists are paid attention to, that is, you know, some people do, some people don't, but these are the scientists working on these problems without the interference of big business and politicians. So it's best that we listen to them, but this is part of the integrated solution. And then as far as research and education, you know, some of these are somewhat controversial. For instance, zoos. There are some people who do not agree with zoos. And I should say zoos have come a very, very long way, even in the past 10 years, 20 years. Whereas it just used to be animals in cages to gawk at. they have become research institutions and educational institutions, and they have worked very hard for the physical and emotional well-being of the animals that are housed there, whether they're like considered a zoo or an aquarium, but also we do include in the mix like botanical gardens. These are those facilities that have plants and have animals for people to view and to learn about, to have up close encounters with them. Um, and whereas like you might pay, and I don't even know what it is nowadays, just a round figure, and I know this is low, but just for the sake of argument, you pay, $25 to get into Philadelphia Zoo. How much of that money goes to feed and house the animals versus, a larger chunk of that money goes to, well, not a larger chunk, but some of that money goes to research on these animals that are in peril, or conservation efforts like preserving land in their native habitat, or helping the indigenous peoples in their native habitat to protect the animal in its native habitat. And when you walk around a zoo and you see a giraffe or a tiger, it doesn't just say tiger, it doesn't just say giraffe. It's a very large education board that will tell you about that animal and where it's from and its conservation means. And like behind the scenes, we saw this on the Saving Otter 501, the Monterey Bay Aquarium. You can tour the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but there's also an entire research facility that is part of the Monterey Bay Aquarium that your admission money goes to help fund. And you saw, like, for instance, year round, they do different surveys on the otters and the other animals that live there. It gives people, it invokes a kind of an empathy if they actually see that animal up close, that they may want to conserve, like a giraffe. If they actually see one, they have more empathy for it. This is me. Shameless plug. That is my Eagle Yankee. This is when I was your age and when I was cool, or yeah, when I was cool, when it was interesting, and I ran a wildlife hospital in the Lehigh Valley. And I also, what I did with the birds of prey that could not be released due to permanent injury is I tamed them and I took them into schools for presentations, whether they owls, hawks, or eagles. Took them into, like, for Boy Scout presentations or nursing homes. And so what that does is, you can, all you want, you can talk about an animal and show a picture of an animal, but until you have a live animal on your, like, bring it and are a foot away from an audience with this majestic animal, and you can talk about the conservation of the animal. Obviously we don't have the animals riding bicycles and doing tricks and playing with a ball, but you talk about the conservation of that animal and why it's important to care. And most people can remember, oh, when I was in second grade, somebody brought an owl to class. You remember that. One of the wildlife hospital rehabilitation facilities in our area came to Northampton Community College a few years ago and brought an eagle. Now, I did my thing back in the 90s. It was a very long time ago. With this, currently they do this too. And as far as zoos and aquaria, just one really great example here is back in 1990, when I was 20, I worked at this facility. It's Mote Marine Laboratory in Sarasota, Florida, one of the most respected marine laboratories in the world, especially with shark research back then. And this is all it was. Now, there was color film in 1990. I don't know why it's in black and white. But this is what it looked like when I was there. It was this facility and a parking lot, and the public wasn't invited. That Sarasota is a huge tourist area on the Gulf Coast of Florida. Millions of visitors a year, but you didn't go to Mote Marine Laboratory as a tourist. You went if you worked there, working with the manatees or the sharks or the dolphins or the sea turtles, and I happened to be working with sea turtles. So really the only people who knew about it were local people and, people in the field of marine biology. And since I was there 30 years ago, Here is the facility. This was taken a few years ago. Here's the building that's right there, this little tiny area where research is done. But in the last 30 years, what they've done is they built an aquarium here. They also have a marine mammal rehabilitation center. That's not in this picture, it's across the street. A sea turtle rehabilitation center that's 3 times the size of this. And so what they've done is they've turned this into a tourist destination. The millions of visitors that go to Sarasota, Florida every year look to see what is there to do in Sarasota, and they can go to an aquarium and learn all about the facility. They get to see the animals. They get brochures. They go through the gift shop. So you have little kids, you know, they bring home a stuffed turtle or a manatee. You get a bumper sticker or a t-shirt. And the admission into the facility funds the research that goes on. Whereas before they just relied upon, you know, government grants or private donation, because you actually can also donate additional money, and I should say money in addition to your admission fee. And then, you know, I drive around in my car, and I have a sticker, I think it's still there, from Mote Marine Laboratory. It's advertising their effort. You go to the website, and you see stuff for sale, and so these research institutions sometimes have public attractions. They build public attractions to for publicity for their research efforts, or vice versa. You know, what used to be a zoo a long time ago, where you could just come and gawk at the animals, now are research and conservation facilities, and they absolutely play a role in being that conduit, being that bridge between the research and the role of the importance of conservation to the everyday tourist, to the public. Absolutely critical, because all of the efforts that we saw before, well, not all of them, but you know, you talk about preserving land, or the Endangered Species Act, species reintroduction, you know, seed banks, cloning, tissue saving, the different laws that are put into place as far as invasive species, you know, poaching, different laws as far as pollution, all of that. I should say most of that is like in a bubble if nobody knows about it. You have to have a spokesperson. You have to have some sort of an ambassador that bridges that gap between the importance of conservation and the everyday public, which is what this class is about. You know, whether you are an ecologist or want to be ecologist, or whether you are a business major or a theater major, you know, you've taken this class, and hopefully what you've gotten out of it is the importance of education in the efforts of ecology and of conservation. So that is a great place to end our material for this course. It's up to you. You know, I'm a scientist. You might be a scientist someday, but this isn't like your doctor. If you go in and you need heart surgery and your doctor and the doctor's team does it for you and you're all fixed up. This is a group effort. It takes a village. It takes a world to fix the planet. And I hope that you become at least a small part of it. And because it's important for all of us and for generations to come. So thank you for your time, and thank you for everything. And everybody, please be happy and please be healthy. So cheers, everyone, and peace, and enjoy your day, enjoy your semester, enjoy your career, and enjoy your life. I wish you the best. Take care. Over and out.